My name's Phil Roberts. I'm a creative retoucher and motion designer currently working out of London. Some of you might know me as Raid Zero. I've actually prepared a short showreel, especially for NAB. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks, guys. Okay, so a little bit of a background. I went to university, studied graphic design. While I was there, I kind of started getting into Photoshop and retouching, and then eventually became a creative retoucher. Now, what a creative retoucher is someone who takes photography or 3D renders and basically combines all of those elements into one coherent shot. So an example here, so the bathtub here was shot, all the water is photography, stock photography, and all of the elements inside the bath are actually CG, 3D elements that have been comped in. I've been a creative retoucher now for 9 years, and 6 of which I've been with a company called Taylor James, which I've worked at the London office, but they have offices in New York and LA and newly in Berlin. So why Cinema 4D? So in my job, I work in the automotive department, so I'm taking CG renders of cars and comping them into photographic backgrounds. Now, this isn't always a very creative process, and I kind of pride myself in being kind of half technical and half creative, and it was getting to the point where it's more and more technical side. So because of my job and compositing CG elements, I actually got to know quite a few things about CG, but didn't actually do it myself. So I kind of took the decision in January last year to start looking into doing 3D myself, and kind of looked into different software and which kind of 3D package was going to be a best fit for me. I was quite lucky that my IT department had lots of software available and lots of plugins and things that I could just try out and kind of explore. And Cinema kind of jumped out at me as the best fit for me, basically. It was well designed, had a great user interface that was really familiar to me. So using Photoshop all the time, having a layout similar to Adobe products was really great and a really quick way to get me into the software. There's thousands and thousands of free tutorials online. I can't stress this enough how good the knowledge base and how people are willing to share their knowledge. It's fantastic. Also having great documentation as well. So whenever you don't know what a button does, you can just go in there and there's so much information just inside Cinema. Being a compositor, a 2D compositor, I get to use passes from a lot of 3D third-party renderers. Cinema supports lots of third-party renderers, so I personally use Octane, but I have dabbled in Arnold, Redshift, and a few of the others. And it's fantastic that Cinema supports all of these. Also, Cinema 4D has a large user group, and everyone's been so welcoming, and I've made so many new friends over the last year, and it's so good, and I've never ever felt kind of like an outsider. It's been fantastic. So my learning, I had an hour and a half commute to and from work, and I kind of took that decision in January to start watching tutorials in that time rather than reading the newspaper and getting depressed at all of the horrible news. So what I would do is just watch people using the software and just kind of let it all sink in, and later on I would go home and then I'll be trying those tutorials. But I was always trying to think of a different way to use them, so combining different tutorials, and because ultimately this was a creative decision to start looking into 3D. So watching a tutorial and then taking another one and letting that just spark an idea. Also, just sitting in front of Cinema 4D and just tinkering around and exploring different things and trying to break it, and just get to the point where I need to Google something or watch another tutorial, those sort of things. So this is actually my first render that I ever created in Cinema 4D. It's actually a tutorial from Grayscale Gorilla called Fast 3D Topographies in Cinema 4D Tutorial. So I think this was based off something that Lee Griggs did, who's an artist who does development for Arnold. But Chris just took it to another level, basically, and this really, really interested me. So it was actually one of the first tutorials I kind of did start to finish. And yeah, hopefully you'll agree it kind of came out quite well. This is another one as well where I kind of started getting into lighting and texturing. And I actually used mixamo.com, which is a product from Adobe where you can use motion capture and poses and add them to models. Either that's on mixamo.com or you can upload your own. So kind of 4 months in, I decided to take the decision to buy a PC because I wanted to get into GPU rendering. So this is actually my first render in Octane. Octane is a third-party renderer. If you don't know, kind of you do renders on the GPU rather than the CPU, which gives you kind of really, really good feedback and good speed so that you can art direct your scenes a lot quicker. Around that time, I discovered Brograph. So if you don't know who Brograph are, Brograph.com is a tutorials and plugins website. And they created this button that helps people that are creating dailies when you kind of sit down at your desk and you don't know what to come up with. When the world's your oyster, sometimes it is hard. If you can create anything, you normally just sit down and create nothing. So having a brief and having a couple of parameters that you need to work towards really helped me in particular. So Rando Render is a button that you can press, and it will give you a random material or kind of surface and an object and maybe a style of some well-known Cinema 4D artists. So here, press the button and Cheese Superhero came up. And to me, that was a good kind of spark to then start thinking, like, how am I going to make a cheese material? How am I going to light that? How am I going to like show a superhero, you know? So that was a really good tool for me, and I kind of took that to the next stage. So this was my first Rando render, where I took a scan of a shoe, and I wanted to create a like slime material, kind of go for that Ghostbusters Slimer sort of vibe, have New York in the background. And I actually used the Cinema 4D sculpting tools. So what I did is I took the mesh and I subdivided it down, so I've got lots and lots of polygons. And then I was able to sculpt all of the kind of drips and like down the side, and even the geometry that's protruding from the bottom as well, all in Cinema. And then it was composited in Photoshop afterwards. This was my next one, which is called Wood Crab, which are the two words that I got from the Rando Renders. So these are actually free scans that you can get. So if you go to 3dscans.com, they have a wide resource of just 3D photogrammetry that you can just download and just use in your projects, basically. So it's really good for R&D if you want to do shade development, because these are just quite complex meshes. So you can see how your materials are going to react on these surfaces. So all of the ground texture and the crabs are all done in Cinema 4D, and then it's composited onto the sea and the sky in Photoshop. All of the ground is a displacement texture. So basically, it's, again, like photogrammetry, and it's actual sand that's been photographed, and then all of the depth map and normal maps and all have been created that, to give you this result. Okay, so this one is actually a David Ariev-inspired watch. So if you don't know who David Ariev is, he does tutorials, Octane tutorials for iDesign.com. And at that time, he was very much doing a lot of space kind of work. So yeah, this was my kind of homage to David. This one was called Copper Forest. So again, just still learning how am I going to populate a scene with trees and grass and kind of give it that copper sort of feel. This one's called Road Magnet. So when I got those two words, I really wanted to have the magnet as if it was like kind of affecting the road. And in essence, it's actually quite simple. So I Googled how I'm going to make a ripple, and then what came up. So I can actually show you in Cinema quickly. So if I just make a plane, and then I'm going to use a formula defomer. So this one here, if I just drop it and make it a child of this plane, you can start to see we're just starting to get some kind of ripple. It's actually too big, so I'm just going to bring this down. But what I was finding, it just didn't really look like it was going the right way. So if I jump into the actual formula effector, and there's this parameter here where it says U plus T. If I reverse that by putting a minus in there, what happens is then that reverses the way the wave is moving. And then I thought I wanted a few more ripples in that. So if I just actually scale that down, scale that down, you just get a few more ripples. And then that's basically how I created that on the road there, on that road surface. And then basically, same again, just texturing and lighting that kind of give you that final look. And all the mountains in the background are all landscape objects. It's a sun mixed with a HDR, just to give you that nice sky, and then a little bit of grading in Photoshop. Here's a few more of the renders that I've started to create as I was going along. Again, exercises in texturing, lighting, trying to get more realistic results as I went along. A little bit of matte painting as well. I used to do a lot of matte painting in my spare time, and this was actually on May the 4th. So I created this piece. Okay, so some of the projects that I'm going to cover today. So Time, which was a 6-second animation project. And I'm going to cover natural camera moves from keyframes. My second one is raidCity, basically the complexity we can get from simplicity. And and I'm going to cover Morph cameras as well as Octane scatter. And the final project is destroyed.Earth, which is a personal project. I'm going to show you how I made the textures for that, and also how I bored the objects to create chunks that are coming out of the Earth. So time. So this is kind of one of my first actual kind of animation projects. Almost up until this point, I've been very much 2D and stills. So this was a kind of test of my own skills and how I was going to apply those skills to the work. So the brief was it needed to be 6 seconds. The theme was time, and the logo needed to be featured because it was the whole project was 10 artists, each have 6 seconds, and then it's kind of edited together, so it creates a 60-second piece at the end to kind of launch the studio that wanted it. It was a 3-day deadline, so it was quite a quick turnaround. So I kind of utilized kit bashing and cloners as much as I could, or assets that I'd already prepped, just so I could get it out, basically. So again, I utilized mixamo.com. So here we have a pose of a man in a cockpit. So he's holding the joystick. I already had a kind of a spaceman guy that I'd already textured and kind of done all his materials. So I just uploaded it. And then you basically just move all the points to his elbows, his knees, his head, and then you can use that rig then to use on your own character. So this is the actual 6-second spot that I made. So what I wanted to do is just have him kind of looking down at his controls, and then he looks up into the kind of cabin where all the, say, like military people are there with all their clipboards and things like that. And then eventually he looks forward, and then there's like a rush of energy and lots of vibration. And I'm going to show you how I made that camera move. Okay, so here's the scene, just stripped back. So I haven't got any textures in there. It's just to show you the camera move, basically. So what I've done is I've got him looking up to the balcony, and then as it goes forward, he rushes into the portal. So it's really, really simple. So I've got a few keyframes just here, and I'm going to show you how I put that together. So I've got my first kind of shot here. So I'm just going to go down to my coordinates and just select all of these and just create a keyframe. So I'm holding control and just clicking. So that's my first keyframe. Now I'm going to jump to my 4-up view. So just pressing the middle button on the mouse. The top right-hand corner usually is your top view, but I've actually changed it to my perspective because what I want to do is actually move the camera, which is essentially his head. So you can see here I've removed the guy's head just so it doesn't get in the way of the camera, just for ease. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip forward a few frames. So say like 25 frames. And then I'm just going to make him look up. And then set another keyframe, so holding control and clicking. And then I'm going to skip through some more keyframes. And then I'm just going to rotate his head so he looks up towards the people up on the balcony. Set another keyframe. And then skip ahead again. So all the time I'm just kind of constantly thinking like where I want him to look. And so I want him to look down his controls again. So it's almost like he's getting a nod from them, like, are you ready to go? And he's looking down at his instruments again. So I'll hit another keyframe. And then just before he's about to shoot off, I want him to look up again. So he's looking straight. So he's putting his head back in his chair, like looking where he wants to go. Set another keyframe there. And then I think it's around 125 where we start moving. Okay, so I basically made the camera a child of the cockpit. So the cockpit's animated to go towards the portal, and I wanted the camera and obviously the pilot to move with him. So around, let's say 123, we'll set a keyframe. And then just after that starts going, I'm going to set another keyframe, because what I want to do is I want to, actually I want to go back to 25. I want his head to kind of kick back as if he's almost like G-force, or that energy from the cockpit moving. I wanted him to feel that energy. So if I just kick his head back up to there, and then set another keyframe. And then what I want to do is actually, because it's moving away from after that 125 moment, I just actually want to grab that keyframe, just move it a couple of frames afterwards. And let's see what we got there. So I'll jump back into here, just middle clicking on the camera. And let's see what we got. So you can see it's kind of there, but what's wrong with it is actually, because we're doing a first-person view, if you think about your own head, your own body never stops moving, really. And that kind of point where it completely stops just before he's about to leave, I thought was a little bit odd. So what I wanted to do is just add a little bit of natural movement to that camera. So the way I can do that is using the Vibrate tag. So if I right-click on my camera, go to Cinema 4D tags, and down to Vibrate, what I want to do is just put a little bit of rotation on the camera. So enable rotation down here. Now if I play again, now it really doesn't want to go. So you can see, obviously we don't want that. It's a bit too much. So we're going to reduce some of these parameters down here. So it's on 30 degrees at the moment. We're actually going to take these down to 1. And change the, actually we'll leave the frequency where it is. Let's see what we've got now. So now he's kind of like, he doesn't really stop. He's always kind of moving. It's just a little bit of kind of jiggle. You can feel the weight of the helmet a little bit more. And it just ended up being a little bit more natural in the look. So that's how I created that a bit more natural look. Okay, so after I finished this project, I actually wanted to kind of explore some other shots. So because I had the guy prepped and I had all of these assets and lighting already done, I wanted to start getting into kind of creating some more shots that maybe could build up to that 6-second piece, or maybe a bit after. And I actually came up with the kind of visor kind of animating on, which I thought was really, really cool at the time. It's actually using PolyFX. So what's happening is basically all of the triangles are scaling up all at the same time, and I created a mixed texture between an emissive texture and a glossy black material, and I was animating them at the same time, basically. So as they're scaling up, that kind of fade between the emissive texture and the black glossy texture is happening at the same time. I can show you quickly how I did that. Let me just open it, sorry. So I've just got a fall off on a shader effector. So I've triangulated a plane so it goes into triangles, because basically I wanted triangles because I thought squares were just didn't have the right feel. So I made it all triangles, and you can see there how it goes from nothing, and you can animate on all of the triangles like this, and it's really, really easy to create. So what we can do is just make a plane, and then we're going to give it a few more subdivisions. So a few more segments, so let's say 40 by 40. So we've got a few more squares, and we're going to make it editable. So I'm going to hit C on the keyboard, and then go to Mesh, Commands, and then Triangulate. So basically turns all of those squares into triangles, just halves them basically. And then what we want to do is grab our PolyFX. So make that a child of our plane. And it's not going to do anything yet until we add a shader effector. You could use a plane effector as well, but because ultimately I was going to use a shader later on, I used the shader effector. So if I go into the parameters here, and if I just take this down to -1, our plane disappears because essentially I've just told it that it's got a negative value, so it doesn't have any more. So, but what I want to do is actually have that scale up with a fall off. So here you can see I'm kind of transitioning, and you can animate that coming on and off. So that's basically how I did that. Here's another shot as well that I kind of did afterwards, just as another kind of establishing shot. Just a bit of fun, really. Okay, so my next project is raidCity. It's another personal project where I utilized kit bashing, so the megastructure pack from Brograph. Things I was learning in this one was like how to add atmosphere using Octane scatter, using grayscale gorilla signal to do the flickering of lights, mixing HDRs with sunlights, mixed textures, and Morph Camera, which is actually what I'm going to show you how to do today. So this was the initial still that I did, and you can see like how complex the scene is. It's lots of smoke, kind of atmosphere, tiny, tiny lights. There's neons going on, and just the overall kind of lighting is quite realistic. But I always wanted to animate this, so the kind of best way I thought I could do it was just to have this as my establishing camera, and then have a second camera that I knew where I wanted to finish. And what you can do in cinema is actually take both of those cameras and morph between the two of them, so it creates like a path between the two cameras. And you can see the results here. So again, the spaceship I've got there is all kit bashed as well. So using the same pack, but I've actually just scaled bits down and just added bits here and there just to give you that shape of a ship. And you can see my logo on the building there, just flickering on and off. That's the actual grayscale gorilla signal working. It's actually a preset. And all of the lights and all of the buildings are all using Octane scatter. So there's actually only around 8 buildings in this scene that are just distributed across a plane and all rendered at render time. So you don't actually see them in your viewport. They actually show up as splines. And guides. Same for the lights as well. So they're all in a random color. So they're all different colors, just tiny, tiny spheres that just cloned over a surface, just to give you that complexity. But actually, in essence, it's really, really, really simple. Okay, so I'll jump into cinema and show you that scene. So all of those green, red, yellow, blue lines all represent the buildings that are in the scene. The kind of main buildings, I wanted to keep those kind of more art directable. So I separated those out and just had just a few kind of hero buildings that I wanted to place myself, because the kind of scatter, like you can control it, but sometimes it doesn't let you control it as much as you like. But of course, if you wanted to place each and every one of those buildings, it would get really, really heavy, really, really quick. But to create the Morph camera, as I said, I have an end camera, start camera, sorry, which is this one, and then I have my end camera, which is here. So what we want to do is create like a nice, smooth transition between the two. So if I select both of those cameras and go up to my camera option up here, excuse me, and go down to camera morph. This creates a new camera, which then, if we look through that camera, starts off in our start position. And if we click on our camera tag, we actually have this blend option. So there's a slider here, where as you can see, we're perfectly sliding between each of those cameras, and it's made a really nice transition between both of those cameras. And what we can do is keyframe that. So if we go to our coordinates of our camera and just select them all, and we keyframe that. So actually, we want to keyframe this blend option, sorry. So get rid of that. So start keyframe here, and then I'll skip all the way to the end. So I'll just drag my thing there, and then drag this all the way to 100, and then keyframe that as well. So now when we play in the viewport, we're getting that really nice transition between the first camera and the second camera. Lots of great feedback in the viewport as well, just because we're only calculating all those buildings at render time, so we're letting the computer do the work, not us. And that's how I created that. And if I come out of that camera, I'll just show you, you still get really, really good feedback, and it's, in essence, like when you render it, it actually looks very, very, very complex. So I can just launch my Octane Live Wind. Let's just make this a bit smaller. So it might take a few seconds to kind of update and just process. But once it's kind of loaded into our live viewer, we can move around the scene, and you get really, really good feedback. So you can see here how complex now that scene looks, just because the GPU is doing all the hard work, and you still get really, really good feedback on that scene. Like even zooming in, like really, really close. I'm in kind of foggy atmosphere, and you're getting all the lights, the light shining through the buildings, and it's just really, really great to have this complexity, but actually it's like a really, really simple scene. So you can see there the sky that I've got in there, and all the buildings that are kind of used in the scene are all back here. All of these buildings back here help make up that whole scene. Okay, so the last project I'm going to talk about today is called Destroyed.Earth. It's another personal project. And originally what I wanted to do is actually create a still of the Earth, and just as it's been destroyed, basically. So all the water has disappeared from the Earth, and I wanted chunks of the Earth to kind of drift out. I actually did a kind of step-by-step in my process. So I just recorded my screen as I was doing it, and started off in Photoshop, moved into Cinema 4D, and then ultimately back into Photoshop to do the compositing. It's up on my YouTube if you want to watch it, but actually since then I've kind of revisited it. It was a good exercise for me because I kind of did it quite early on, and I kind of wanted to see like how far I had actually come personally. So I revisited it and made an animation. Hopefully you'll agree it looks a lot better. Some of the things I'll cover is making custom Earth textures, the clouds and the atmosphere, and some of the things I use like Octane scatter, cloner, emissive textures, and balls, which is ultimately how I created the huge pieces of landmass that are kind of leaving the Earth, which you'll see now. So I had a really kind of slight camera move as it's kind of like drifting in, kind of like on an axis. So it makes you feel a bit more like you're in space. Had all the pieces floating around, and that massive chunk of Earth coming away, all of the sparks and the glow and all of these things that I was kind of iterating and just testing out different techniques on how to do it. Also, on the dark side of the Earth as well, I wanted to have a sense of there's like places on fire, there's holes in the ground as well that are glowing. Obviously, because there's a really strong light source on the right-hand side, and not so much on the left, that all of those emissive textures kind of shine through, and they're a lot brighter than the actual surface. So let's jump into cinema. I'm basically going to show you how I created the chunks coming out of the Earth. So essentially, this is just it. So if I drag out this piece and just turn this off. So I've got this rock texture. Actually, I'll open up the rock so you can see how it looked originally. So I had this rock, which is from this guy called Alan Vejovic. He's got a pack on Gumroad that you can buy. It's really, really cheap. Fantastic resource if you want to put rocks in your scene. They come with two different types of textures. So you've got this desert texture, and then you've got more like mossy, kind of Scottish-looking rock material, which is really great. Not exactly what I wanted to use it for, but it worked really well for what I wanted to do. So I took this rock, and then basically what I did is I took my Earth model. So I've got my Earth here, and then you can see here that I've kind of intersected this rock with the Earth, and then I've created a ball object, and I just placed both of those in there. So if I turn this back on, and just swap these around. So it basically takes all of even the material and all of the geometry and just balls it out of the Earth. So you're getting all that rock texture. So if I copy that, just holding Control and just dragging, creates another version of it. And then if I go into the ball, and instead of A subtract B, if we go down to A intersect B, it gives me a perfect kind of piece that I can then just move out. So it's still got all of that rock texture, the same sort of thing, and it's just a really nice piece that you can then like scale down if you need to, and it'll where the kind of intersection happens between the sphere and the rock, you just get that really nice edge, and just feels like a piece of floating Earth that's come off. There we go. So I'll show you the kind of finished article again. So you can see just how we created all of those pieces. And again, I used those rocks again to kind of scatter and orbit the Earth as if they're pieces that are already broken off. And what I did here to create all the glow around the edges is actually, instead of using the actual rock texture, I used an emissive texture just to just go all the way around the edge where it broke the surface of the Earth. And then it's all composited in After Effects using a couple of plugins like Shine, just adding a bit of lens effects as well, because I kind of figured you'd be looking out of a window or something like that, so it's got a bit of lensing on it as well. Just all these things that kind of bring it all together at the end with a little bit of grade. Okay, so that concludes my talk today. Again, really want to thank Maxon and the whole community really for being really, really welcoming. You can find me at raid0.com, which has got links to all my social media, and my handle is @raid0. Thanks very much.